Hi everyone and happy CX Day. We are kicking off our celebration right now in Australia where it is currently October 7th and we've begun Customer Experience Day, a global celebration around great customer experience and the people who make it happen. And this is our very first event for our 2014 CX Day, and we are coming live from all around the world for a Google Plus Hangout. And before we kick that hangout off today, I just wanted to give you a couple of admin notes. You can always find more information about our CX Day as we continue to celebrate for the next 24 hours at www.cxday.org. We look forward to seeing you on an additional 3 more of these Google Plus Hangouts, as well as 2 Twitter chats and a webinar tomorrow. We have local networking events happening in over 25 cities, and you'll find out who our CX Impact Award winners are for 2014 very, very soon. In the meantime, I wanted to remind you that during this Google Plus Hangout, you have the opportunity to ask our panel of experts questions live while they are here on Google Plus. You can do that one of 2 ways. You can ask those questions as a comment here on our live broadcast on Google Plus, or you can ask them on Twitter using hashtag CXDay. So we look forward to taking your questions as we discuss the prepared questions that we have ahead of time, but please feel free to engage with us live over the next 30 minutes. And without further ado, I want to go ahead and turn over our Google Plus Hangout to Annette. Annette, do you want to get us kicked off for CX Day 2014?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Annette Franz. I am Director of VOC Consulting for Confirm It, and I'm really excited to be kicking off CX Day for the 2nd year in a row. As a matter of fact, last year I hosted the Australian Google Hangout, so I'm excited to start the celebrations again this year. So we're going to get started right away. We have a great topic today. We will be chatting with a couple of folks around, as Leslie mentioned, around the globe, starting with Cyrus Allen from Australia, Brian Andrews, who's in Dallas, and Karen Firstman, who is in Seattle. So not quite as global as we'd hope, but we do have our Australian representative there, and thank you, Cyrus, for joining us again to kick off the first hangout of the CX Day celebrations. Our topic today is linking CX strategy to corporate strategy and brand values. And before we get started, I'm actually going to ask each of the panelists to just briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into the first question. So with that, Cyrus, I'll go ahead and have you start with the introductions.
Yeah, thank you, Annette and Leslie, and happy CX Day to everybody around the world. A fantastic event organised by CXPA, and very happy to be involved. My name is Cyrus. I'm a partner with Strativity Group. We're a global consulting company specialising in customer experience management strategy.
All right, Brian, you want to take it from there?
Sure. My name is Brian Andrews. I also am a consultant. I started my firm back in March. Before that, I spent the last 11.5 years with Intuit, and I ran the customer experience function at Intuit in one of the business units, and ran the cross-functional Net Promoter Score strategy across the entire company with leaders across all the businesses. So that's who I am, and that's my background.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Karen, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Karen Firstman, and I'm not a consultant. I am VP of Agent and Customer Experience for Safeco Insurance, which is owned by Liberty Mutual Company, which is an international company. I manage our customer and agent experience for the U.S. operations, which includes customer experience strategy, voice of customer experience design, and I also have responsibility for training and all of our process improvement efforts. I'm passionate about the customer experience, have been on the board since we founded the CXPA a number of years ago, and I'm a vice chairman as well. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Again, thank you all for joining us. All right, so let's get started with the first question. So we are talking about linking CX strategy to corporate strategy and to brand values. So let's start with the first obvious question. We're going to start with the softball question, which is, how do you develop a customer experience strategy? Cyrus, why don't you go ahead and take that?
So it is one of the biggest challenges, I think, for organisations to develop an effective CX strategy that is linked to and very strongly aligned with overall corporate strategy. In fact, in the work that we do now and in my past roles, I used to be head of experience at one of the big banks here in Australia and also the largest telco. And the biggest challenge often is being able to describe CX strategy in terms that resonate very strongly with the people who are managing the budgets and managing the value outcome for the organization. So the way that we approach that is to essentially start with 3 evidence sets. Naturally, it's everything that you know today about your market, the organization, competitors, and customers, all of the things that you've intuitively understood as an organization. The second evidence set then looks internally at the organization and tries to understand essentially how customer-centric drivers of customer centricity, and tries to figure out where you need to invest internally in your organization from a change perspective to become more customer-focused and customer-centric. Then the third one is to really deep dive from an ethnographic hearts, understand their deep drivers, motivations, needs, etc., and start to map and plan those against the things that you're doing for those customers. Combining those 3 evidence sets then into a very pragmatic roadmap, if you will, that's prioritized against value creation, from our point of view, is one of the strongest ways to create a linkage to corporate strategy. Because what you start to do is identify the things the organization can change internally, as well as the things that they need to do better or differently, or new things that they need to do with and for their customers, but to be able to attribute value back to those and align those with the other initiatives in the organization. I think to round that off, one of both in my corporate roles but also in the consulting roles is that CX professionals need to understand that it's not a greenfield exercise typically. There are other things happening in the organization. So taking that 3 evidence-based approach and building out a logical, linked and sequenced program of work with value attached to it, which respects everything else that's going on in the organization, has for us been the most effective way to build a solid and lasting CX strategy. Over to you guys.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Cyrus. Brian, you want to weigh in and give your thoughts or respond to what Cyrus has posed?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of overlaps in this strategy that Cyrus talked about with our basic approach. Where it deviates a little bit is I think we start with the customer and being very targeted about which customer segments you want to go after and which ones are going to help drive growth, and then understanding those unique customer needs by segment to help shape what kind of strategy you need, what kind of customer experience strategy. And we do that through applying design thinking principles. Historically, Intuit did a lot of work with the Stanford Design School, IDEO, a lot of great companies that apply design thinking and training the organization on how to walk in the customer's shoe and really understand the customer's unspoken needs. And then we also focused on trying to learn from some of the wheel makers, and some of the wheel makers have done a wonderful job of creating a metaphors and kind of a storyline for how they want that customer experience to be, something that people can relate to. So Apple Retail inspired us a lot, and Ron Johnson, who started the Apple Retail organization, wanted it to be like a fine hotel where not like any other kind of retail experience. So he used that metaphor to try to inspire people, and they started with their concierge service way back, and greeting people as they leave the store and as they enter the store, those kind of things. Just that spirit of a metaphor helped galvanize what that experience was going to be like, and it was easy to communicate. So I'm a big believer in creating those kind of metaphors that are extremely helpful. And then you get into what Cyrus is talking about, which is identifying where you've got organizational gaps and processes that need to be tightened up or need to be improved. And overall, it's a big change management effort in many organizations. So treating it like a change management effort, I like John Cotter's change model. So applying some of his principles to driving change and incorporating that as part of the strategy, I think is really helpful.
Okay. Thank you for that. I like John Cotter's model as well. I think that's a great model to follow. I'm sorry, I'm just watching to see if Karen has popped back in again, and we seem to keep losing her. Karen, can you hear us?
I'm back. I got cut off, or I just called back in a couple times. So can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you now. Do you want to try to weigh in real quickly before we lose you again?
Sure. And I didn't hear the tail end of Brian's, but agree with the strategy that both outlined. I think one of the things we do also from the company perspective here, the strategy component to the strategy attaching with Liberty from the CEO all the way down of Liberty within the business group. So using the financial objectives, so if we have growth goals and we have retention goals, we actually tie the CX work to those goals in addition to the separate but joined customer experience strategy. So it brings
Oh, we lost her. She was on a roll there. That was good. All right, here she comes. She's coming back in. Can you hear us now, Karen?
Okay, I dropped off,
Right.
but I think you got most of it before I got dropped off.
Yep. I think we're gonna lose you again there.
Did you hear anything?
Yeah, you're sound like you're gonna drop off again there. All right. Okay, there you
No?
are. All right, we got you. Do you have anything else you want to add?
Nope. If you got some of it, that's good. Sorry.
I know. Sorry, everyone. We're dealing with some technological challenges today, and we're going to try to keep everybody on as long as we can. Oh, there we lost her again. Sorry about that. All right. Why don't we move on to the next topic? And Brian, you brought up the concept of design thinking, and I think that's a really important piece here as we talk about this next question, which is who designs or who defines the intended customer experience, and what touch points does that definition cover?
Well, for us, I came from the software industry, and in the software industry, it was very clear that the product manager was the end-to-end custodian of the customer experience, and we felt like it was important to define who that person is that has overall responsibility. Now, the people that are involved in the touch points don't obviously all report into the product manager, but at the end of the day, that product manager is responsible for making sure they're delivering an awesome experience. And Intuit, all of our products, we had a goal of having the highest Net Promoter Score against the next closest competitor. So we wanted to be 10 points further ahead than the next closest competitor. And it was on the product manager to understand what those customer needs were and to make sure that we had an experience, an end-to-end experience that yielded that kind of a result. Now, we would create, as the CX team, we would help them create operating mechanisms, make sure we understood those causal linkages between all of the various groups, so we knew what the biggest drivers of loyalty were and customer sat were. But ultimately, it was the product manager, in our case, that defined the experience, drove priorities to improve the experience, and was kind of the quarterback for the entire group that delivered the experience.
Okay. Cyrus, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I agree with some of the great points Brian has made, and I think the concept of design thinking, to touch on that for a second, obviously is critically important, and it relates very heavily, I think, to some of the questions these days that are arising in businesses, which are, who owns the customer experience and who defines the customer experience. And I think what we're seeing is that in many organizations who have a relatively immature approach, they kind of point to either the marketing person or maybe the product person or maybe the internal design guy to say, well, you've got to come up with it. In our experience, design thinking is tool to help organizations coalesce thinking around a common purpose. But the question as to who owns the customer experience articulation, I think depends on the organization. It could be the CEO, the CCO, the CMO, might be head of product design or head of experience if you have one of those. But the key thing is to start with working out what that experience needs to be. Now, I talked about 3 evidence sets before, one of which is the customer evidence set, and that is, understanding very deeply, through direct observational research, all of the normal ethnographic techniques that you understand and unpack where your customers are at, what's really important, what are the true human motivators behind all of their decisions and considerations, and reflecting that back against your company's purpose, if you will, and figuring out what your flag on the hill needs to be over a period of time. the articulation, or in fact, in many organizations, the lack of a clear articulation as to what the CX vision is or what CX needs to be is one of the stumbling blocks we find for organizations. You know, they say we want to be more customer centric, we want to be better at experience, but nobody in the organization has yet delivered it. So creating that unified, single and clear vision across the organization is, and in terms of who does it, our view is also that the broader input that you get across the organization, at least from an involvement and a buy-in and a perspective point of view, is critical.
Thanks, Cyrus. I agree. Karen, you want to add to that? Do I need to repeat the question? I know you had dropped off there for a second.
No, I heard it. I heard it, and hopefully I can get most of my thoughts and agree with what was said. And I think I would speak for, I've done this work in both insurance and before that in banking, financial services. And one of the things that I see that is also a pitfall back to some of the comments that were made is around defining the desired end result. Absolutely agree, it has to be important in defining a vision and where you are and where you want to go. I often see
we lost her. All right, let's see if she comes right back. All right, you back? There you are.
I'm back, and I'm going to speak fast. That a lot of times I see companies try and make their vision around a metric, and while it's important to have success measures, that's not your it needs to start at the top and have you have a not helping drive your ability, alignment and accountability to it as well.
Yep, great point. Okay, I think we got most of that. You're dropping off there a bit, but I think we got most of that, so thank you for that. Okay, you guys, Cyrus or Brian, either one of you want to weigh in on what we've heard so far, or?
No, I agree with that, and I think one of the principles that Cyrus, I think, said, and Karen both talked about, having shared small teams go out, help try to define what that vision is going to be through observation and through understanding the customer together really makes it much more powerful in terms of when you go to implement any kind of vision. When you've got multiple set of eyes looking at it and you've got a collaboration, we apply the two principal team to all the teams where they're very small, or two pizzas they can only eat two pizzas, and if the team's any bigger than that, it's probably not going to be real successful in trying to define what that vision is.
Right. Okay, Cyrus, want to add anything else, or shall we move on to the next question?
No, we're good to move on to the next question, thanks.
Okay, all right. So next question is, how do we ensure that our CX strategy supports and aligns with our brand values? You want to start with that, Cyrus?
Sure, yeah.
Oh, sure.
So this is a massive topic for most organizations that we talk to. You've got essentially a marketing team who in a relatively easy way, and I don't want to dismiss the importance of brand management, relatively, it's kind of straightforward to come up with a strap line to articulate a promise and to get that out in the standard communications activities that we see with organizations. But I think one of the key issues with organizations today is because it's relatively easy to do that and relatively hard to engage and gear the rest of the organization behind it, what happens most of the time is that there's a dissonance between what's promised and what's delivered, so the brand gap, essentially. So the way that we approach that is to work with an organization to firstly ensure that they've got very, very clear articulation of what the brand promise is and that it's a real promise. It's not just something which is, we're going to be the best and the cheapest and the fastest and all those things, but it's a real incredible promise. Once you have that, then leverage the brand values that are typically in place and create a suite of customer experience principles. And I say principles versus values because the principles to me are it's the how of the organization versus the what. I see the brand promise essentially as the what, and the how is the experience that we deliver, both from a tangible product point of view and an intangible service experiential point of view. So we then use those principles to articulate specific design statements, and those design statements are used universally through an organization to do anything. That can be from crafting a new contact center script through to process flow, through to understanding the end-to-end process that sits behind particular interaction. The idea behind this approach is that we create a unified set from the ground up of experiences over time, because it doesn't just happen like that, but over time that will become more and more brand-centric or on-brand, if you will. So we find that a really pragmatic, down-to-earth and sort of grassroots way of helping the organization who are not in the marketing department understand what the brand truly means when they need to do something, and providing them with tools that help then design the new things or change the things that they're doing to be more on-brand over time. Over to you guys.
Great. Thanks, Iris. Karen, do you want to weigh in?
I think it's absolutely critical, and oftentimes I talk sometimes in terms of what I see that is a challenge, and that is when I see companies that treat the customer experience and brand promise, brand delivery completely separate, and they need to be linked together. They're not one and the same, though, as Cyrus was saying. And so really your brand is what you promise to your customers. Your customer experience is how you deliver how you deliver the experience to your customers. And so making that really clear, but keeping the linkages is so important, because oftentimes I think companies tend to say that the brand, and that's in marketing's department, and the customer experience is over here, and it all needs to align. And so the more that you can continue to reinforce that, and articulate exactly how they complement each other and what each is in terms of definitions, I think is really important.
Great point. Cyrus, did you want to add anything to that, or no? Okay. Brian, do you want to weigh in on this topic?
Yeah, I think they're all great points. The one thing we try to focus on as well is get shared vision on what the benefit is. What is the benefit of the experience you're trying to deliver, and be very crisp on the most important benefit. So if you can align your marketing organization, your sales organization, your support organization with ultimately what's the customer benefit, and why are they hiring your organization to deliver the service or product, and what is the most important thing for them to do, that is a strong aligning principle that we use. For example, in the accounting group which I was in, the accountant's primary objective, or our primary benefit that they were looking for, was to save time. So time during doing taxes is a very compressed, very stressed period of time for them. They've got about 100 days to make a bulk of their money, and they're working 10, 12, 14-hour days, 6, 7 days a week. And anything we could do to save them time had tremendous value for them. So the primary benefit that we were all focused on was saving them time. So whether it's on an IVR, waiting for a IVR tree that's clumsy and awkward, or they can't get their issue resolved, all of those things go against the customer benefit and go against the core promise that we're trying to deliver. So we attacked it a little bit more from a benefit perspective, and ultimately the brand and the messaging resonates from that benefit, but identifying the most important benefit, and it's not a laundry list of benefit, but what is that single one or two most important things that they're hiring you to do, and then aligning around that is a really powerful combination.
Okay. That's a great segue into our next question, but before we take on that next question, I want to throw it out to the audience and see if there are any questions from anybody who's watching us today. If you have a question, please enter it on the Google Plus page and the Hangout page there, or you can tweet it as well, just using the CX Day hashtag, and we'll pick that up out there on Twitter as well. So just wanted to remind everybody that you have the opportunity to do that. So let's so we'll hopefully get some questions in, but in the meantime, let's go into the next question, which is around alignment, and how do we make sure that the organization aligns with and supports the CX strategy that we've defined. Cyrus, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think there are essentially two ways that we've all been talking about today, which is ensuring that there's a clear understanding of the financial value or the value creation potential of the things you're doing in the CX space. And as most organizations typically operate both as they've got a BAU cycle, a business as usual cycle, and a CapEx spend cycle, is making sure that those two things are fairly well articulated in terms of what it means for the customer, whether it be increasing advocacy, increasing SAT, reducing contact time, cost to serve, those sorts of things. But the other one is very critically is also articulating how your CX strategy and the ultimate vision can be tied back to the things people do in their jobs every day and how they're then essentially measured and managed on those. And many organizations are going down the path of having, some people call it ENPS, employee NPS, but you can just call it an internal way of measuring how customer-centric or on-brand somebody is. So that work that I mentioned earlier on around the branded experience principles and using that to design the organization, we also use that internally in feedback systems to check and gauge how individuals and teams are performing against the customer experience principles that the organization is running the business. And the value in doing that is that both for the internal people who are often left out of the equation as to what's happening outside, and this might be somebody in HR or finance who says, well, look, I can't really impact what service delivery is like, and therefore why should my bonuses be made on NPS or SAT? But if we do this internally, it provides a very valid and comparable systematic way of understanding how well people are performing against the very principles that the organization has defined towards being more customer-centric. There are different ways of doing it. That's just the way that we recommend doing it. But being able to give people a very clear, easy understand, and high-frequency set of feedback mechanisms around how from a point of view is another strong way of creating that linkage. Over to you, Brian.
Okay. Actually, I'm gonna switch questions. We're down to 2 minutes, and we're gonna do a speed round here, and and see if we can hit these last two questions real quickly. And I'm gonna give one to Brian. I'm gonna give one to Karen. So, Brian, real quickly for you, what does success look like, and how do we measure it? What does successfully linking your CX strategy to your corporate strategy look like? Sorry to give you just 60 seconds to answer that, but.
Well, I think most organizations are tied to growth. So, to the extent that the customer experience strategy is helping the organization grow, I think that's one of the key indicators of success, is being able to see that causal linkage between improving the customer experience and growing the organization.
All right, thank you.
So, this is Karen. I'll add. Sorry. I was going to add. I think definitely growth. And other key business metrics like retention and cross-sell in any program. If you think about the Net Promoter Score, if you really, your customers will buy more, they'll stay longer with you. And I think the other big one is referring people to your organization, to your company. I think the employee engagement and employee empowerment is a huge success measure as well. So I'd kind of say those four in terms of buy, refer, grow, and then actually have a strong employee base that is continually becomes one of the best places to work.
All right, thank you. And Cyrus, go ahead and weigh in on this. We're not going to make it to the last question, but why don't you go ahead and weigh in on this one?
Yeah, great points, particularly the one around the employee advocacy or the employee buy-in. I think the last one that I would put on the table as a success metric or measure is that the organization itself has made the shift towards being more customer-centric or more experience-oriented. So it doesn't just become the remit of one group over in CX corner somewhere else, but the entire organization has developed new insights, new beliefs, and new capabilities to think, plan, and consider around the customer and everything that they do. I think that's a very strong measure of success.
Great point. Great point. All right, we are at the top of the hour, which means we're at the end of our Google Hangout. I want to thank the three of you for participating in this Hangout. I want to thank the audience as well for joining us, and we are going to continue the conversation in about an hour on Twitter for our first CX Day Twitter chat, and then all day tomorrow we have 3 more Google Hangouts. We've got another Twitter chat tomorrow, and I know that many of you are going to be attending local networking events as well, so enjoy the day, and thank you again.